Hello and welcome to the National Concert Hall. If you are here, you're very, very welcome. If you're joining us online, wherever you are in the world, welcome to Dublin. My name is Tom Redmond. This is our conductor, Gavin Maloney, and this is the RTÉ National Symphony Orchestra. So, over the next hour or so, we're going to hear a complete performance of Tchaikovsky's Fantasy Overture, Romeo and Juliet. And before that, we're going to take it apart a little bit, point out some of the things that happen in the piece that may or may not make a difference between you getting an A or a B. Who knows? We're going to start at the very beginning, but before we do, we're going to put the piece into context. This is music of the Romantic era. Basically the 19th century, a time when the world was changing quite dramatically. Music was changing quite dramatically. The size of the orchestra had grown, Beethoven and Berlioz had pushed things to the limit, and the Industrial Revolution had changed music too. It brought about machinery that gave us a chance to develop and invent new instruments. The tuba became a reality. The keywork on woodwind instruments, the valves on brass became more reliable. And the Industrial Revolution also changed the way people came together to listen to music. Brought about the rise of the middle classes, municipal buildings popped up everywhere, and people wanted to come together to hear music, to find out what this thing was that for a long time had been exclusively for the private houses of Europe. People wanted to expand their minds, they wanted to find out what it was that music could bring them, this exploration of the human condition, which during the Romantic period became more and more pronounced in music as composers started to explore extremes of emotion, of narratives in music, of different ways of expressing themselves. So Tchaikovsky was a great Russian Romantic composer, very big in the Russian National School, and in this piece of music, it's important to remember threes. Threes are the clue to bringing this piece together. Tchaikovsky wrote 3 Shakespeare-inspired overtures: Hamlet, Tempest, and Romeo and Juliet. There are 3 main musical ideas: Friar Lawrence, love, and strife. Quite a lot of the time, he puts 3 phrases or repeats his point 3 times to really drive it home. And there are 3 versions, or 3 revisions of the piece that we're going to play. The first one of 1869, revised in 1872, and then the final version that we know today in the concert hall in 1880. So we begin with Friar Lawrence, who, if you read Romeo and Juliet, is a complicated character. In this piece, he is the one always trying to smooth things over, though there are more layers to him that if you actually go through the play itself. He was quite a deceptive man with his own ambitions, his own motives for doing what he did. But in this music, we hear him played first by the clarinets and bassoons in this sort of quasi-religious, semi-monastic, medieval-sounding chorale. So Friar Lawrence, 3 parts to his theme, 3 phrases, with 1 short breath after the first phrase and a longer gap after the second. It's only a beat more, but it makes a big difference in the tension that creates, that moment's silence, that moment of questioning about whether he's saying the right thing, sets us off on this journey where we know that everything isn't quite as it should be. Now, even if you don't know the story of Romeo and Juliet, and I assume you do, there are so many clues from the beginning that this is going to be an uneasy ride. We're going to carry on with this rising line of dissonances, suspensions that we hear in the strings. One note pitted against another. Clashes of harmony. And then he does it in reverse. The suspensions continue, this time in the woodwind. And then we reach this glorious chord of F minor, and that rising figure in the harp, optimism, aspirational love. And there it is again, dissonance, optimism. So, those rising chords in the harp happen 3 times. Now, the pizzicato notes that we just got to in the violins, those plucked notes, may seem, on first hearing, irrelevant, passing notes to take us to the next section. But just listen to the clarinet in the 3rd bar of the whole piece. Now, could you play that staccato? He's taking that falling line of Friar Lawrence, putting it into the violins in this pizzicato line that then takes us on to a fuller utterance of Friar Lawrence, this time played by the whole woodwind section. There's the falling pattern. Here's Friar Lawrence. And here are those rising suspensions again as he builds the tension. This time the violin's taking the line that the flute had previously. Then he starts to give us a feeling of motion by giving those falling chords in the woodwind section, moving us forward. Until we arrive once again at the rising chords of optimism in the harp. And he repeats those chords 3 times. Now, if this was a classical symphony, if we were in Beethoven's world, we would have had a slow introduction. At that point, actually, it feels like we could really move forward. Tchaikovsky makes us wait. He's nearly there, but he wants to draw this out a little bit more. We're going to start at this section, the poco, a poco stringendo, accelerando. A pedal note in the timpani brings a real feeling of menace, and the rising Friar Lawrence theme is passed from string instrument to string instrument. And then he puts the brakes on again. Just as we're nearly there, he pulls us back. Tchaikovsky, very much a composer of the theatre. He knew how to build drama and tension. But we're nearly there. We hear these dark rising dissonances of the strings, for the third time, and then a series of really quite severe B minor chords that never resolve, they never go anywhere, they're passed between strings and woodwind, backwards and forwards, growing in tension all the time. Then we're off. Music of violence, anger, and tension as we experience the feud between the Montagues and the Capulets. Now, there are a lot of elements at play here to change that almost calm mood of Friar Lawrence to this very dramatic section in the music. Let's just hear strings from 112. So there's far more rhythmic interest than we've had so far, isn't there? And there's syncopation in the second bar of that. And then we've got these clashing harmonies as well. Strings, play me the first chord you play and hold it. And then move to the second chord. And it's the unresolved ninth between the cellos, who have got an E, and then this F sharp that doesn't go away in the first violins and the violas. Let's just hear those same two chords without the F sharps. And you see, that's absolutely fine. And if we took away that F sharp, it wouldn't be anywhere near as like that. Let's put them back in so you can really feel it in the teeth. And it's also the way that Tchaikovsky keeps the keys very close together. Let's just hear the last 5 quavers that you play in that little extract. And all he's doing is going from B minor to C major. But because those keys are so close together, again, it just grates. There's something inside us, something that goes back to our lizard brain. I don't know what it is, that we prefer our keys separated by more than a semitone. And those really stand out by being so close together. Just those close, scrunchy chords, those angry rhythms. And then also the way that he structures this section as well. We're going to jump to 126, and there's a little feature between the first and second violins. It's really quite unsettling. Now, it's one melodic line, but by splitting it between the two groups of violins, our ear's constantly having to readjust. It's constantly trying to find the source of the sound. It's almost like seasickness. The antiphonal writing is a very effective way of rocking the stability of the music. And it will be even more pronounced if you had an orchestra that sat with first violins here and seconds over there, which was sometimes the fashion in the Romantic era. So that idea of looking backwards and forwards, of someone moving a crossfader between those two voices. Now, while they're having this antiphonal battle, there's contrapuntal music going on between the woodwind, cellos, and basses. They start to play Strife slightly out of step with one another. And if we put all of that together, see, everything is there to make us feel uncomfortable. Now, there's one instrument that hasn't featured yet in the piece. The percussion section have been sitting very quietly. Apart from that rolling timpani pedal earlier on, they haven't done very much until this moment of great strife where we hear the color that the percussion bring to this whole section. Very simple, but it just wouldn't be the same without that metal on metal, the clashing of swords of two feuding families. Now, this strife continues, and he starts to play around with different ideas. We're going to hear a little bit now where the flutes take the rising feature of Friar Lawrence and mix it with the rhythm of Strife as Tchaikovsky takes us into the next section. Flutes, rising, Strife rhythm. And then this rising singing melody in the bassoon. It gets passed over to the cello. Feeling of optimism again. Everything's calm. Long A major chord that then slides into love. And that's it, which is the briefest utterance of one of his greatest melodies. Now, his original intention had been to put the love melody at the very beginning of the piece, but as he revised it, he knew actually that would waste it. It was better that it came in the middle of the work. Now, there are a lot of elements at play here again. The first thing I want to focus on are those two chords that take us out of Strife and into love. So let's just hear cellos and horns, please. Just that long A major chord. A major that slides to D flat major. I mean, it's beautiful, but there's something to it. There was a great trend in the 19th and 18th century to attach characteristics to different keys, and they all have different qualities that change the way we can hear a piece of music. Now, A major was thought to include declarations of innocent love, youthful cheerfulness, and trust. So that's in the section leading up to love. And then we go to D flat major, which is a leering key, degenerating into rapture and grief. Now maybe we can overanalyze, but there's something about those keys and the qualities that they bring to a music that Tchaikovsky had in mind, I believe, when he wrote this section. Then there's his genius as an orchestrator. You know, there are reasons why Tchaikovsky stands out as one of the great composers of all time. Structure and form, for sure. Keys, yes. Melodist, untouched by anyone. And then there's the way he orchestrates, the way he gives different melodies, different colors by using different instruments of the orchestra. And you can hear this in all his works, particularly the Sixth Symphony, where he really focuses on the deaf instruments of the orchestra, the violas, the cellos, the bass clarinet, the bassoons. Now, at this point, we hear the love theme played on that perfect combination of muted violas and cor anglais. Let's just hear it again. But why is that combination so right? Well, the best way of finding out is to hear it played differently. So we're going to change it, and I'm going to ask, instead of the chord, to have the oboe play that melody with the violas. That mezzo forte. So it's still beautiful, it still sings, and the oboe is only one seat away from the cor anglais, yet the mood of that changes. By having the oboe soar too high, it's two voices, it's not two people together as one. Now let's hear it played with a trombone. Again, it still works, But because it's so high in the trombone's voice, there's too much intensity. He's too masculine. And it just stands out against the beauty of the violas. And so by using the cor anglais and the violas together, he finds two voices that sit just in the middle of the instrument's range. They're neither too high nor too low. They're not forcing, they are just one. They don't have that natural division of male and female voices of an octave. They are perfect combination, unity, and love. Now, the other colour in the violas, and in a minute we'll hear in the violins, is the muted effect that Tchaikovsky calls on in this section. It just doesn't dull the sound so much as just adds a warmth, a glow to it that wouldn't be there if they didn't have mutes on. And it's like looking at a photograph through a filter. You know, the reality of Instagram is that it's not real. That there is not one picture you see that someone doesn't edit or tweak or colour or change the contrast, because the harsh, stark reality of lighting means that the best palette in the world will always look horrific unless you put filters on. And it's the same with love. Sorry to sound cynical, but if you mask yourself, from the cold, harsh realities of life, love is a beautiful filtered thing that we hear through the warmth of the muted strings. And that's the idea that Tchaikovsky is giving us, that they are in a bubble, that they're not aware of reality. Now we're going to carry on with this secondary love thing. So we hear that brief utterance of the main melody, and then we hear this gently oscillating, diminished passage played by the violins. And the flutes start to sing, that counter melody in the horns. Now, this is another moment of Tchaikovsky's brilliance in orchestration, that pairing of flute and horns. Now, you could argue that the flutes and oboes are playing in unison. The flute has the melody. The oboe is there to support. The flute is that sort of voice of beauty, of purity and innocence, and just behind it, that counter melody, that falling sequence in the horn is sort of the slightly burnished quality of our hero in this story as well. And he mixes them together. And it's a good pairing of instruments, flute and horn. And you hear it a lot in Shostakovich, in his 5th and 10th symphonies, when he's normally crying out about love. You hear it in Star Wars, in Princess Leia's theme, where John Williams uses that same combination to describe innocence and heroism all at the same time. And that, again, is his skill, his brilliance as an orchestrator. Now, we've heard Love, we've heard Strife, we've heard Friar Lawrence. And before we get to the development section, he knew that we needed time to breathe, that we needed time to just digest all that we've heard. So he takes us on this strange bridging passage, this beautiful melody played by the cellos and the bassoon. So we reach then the development section of a piece written in sonata form. Now there's a quote from another Russian composer, Mussorgsky, great Russian composer, and he said, on reaching the development section of a work, a German composer explores and examines and then reaches a conclusion, whereas a Russian reaches a conclusion and then amuses himself with examination and exploration. And that's precisely what Tchaikovsky does. His original intention was to include a fugue in this section, but that became too academic. There are still contrapuntal techniques, but not as strict as a fugue. But he takes every idea he has and he plays with it every which way he can. A mixture of Strife and Friar Lawrence to begin with. Still got that sort of seasick feeling in the violins and violas. Friar Lawrence in the horns. So Friar Lawrence is still there trying to calm this down, even amongst all the chaos of that feature being passed between violins and violas. But there's a syncopation that throws him off his guard, throws him off his sort of stable standing, if you like. So you hear Friar Lawrence in the horns, and then you hear a syncopation in the violins. So in the middle of all this chaos, though, love is still present, albeit on a more subtle level. Let's have the whole orchestra from 3-3-1. So where on earth is love in all of that? Well, we have to look towards the violins. They hold the clue. Violins, could you just play us that same extract, please? Now, just play us the last 4 notes that you have. So we've got Strife rhythm, and if we broaden that even more and add in a passing note, there's the love. Still, amongst all the battling, all the anger, all the musical developments, love is still present all the way through this story. So we've got love intertwined with strife, we've got outbursts of Friar Lawrence, but Tchaikovsky isn't finished yet. He's going to rinse everything he can out of this material. And we return to that secondary love theme that we heard earlier on. Unstable antiphonal rising in the strings, gently oscillating woodwind chords with a secondary love idea. And he keeps doing that, but eventually we've got to arrive to that point, the biggest outburst of love in the whole piece, but this time with a slight difference. So he builds, but this time, love from above. Counter melody in the horns, falling, and then syncopation, the voice of love itself destabilizing all that's happening. Love between the cellos and the woodwind. Contrapuntal with this strange ricochet effect in the violins, like a racing heart. And And then he goes through those themes. Love swept aside by strife. Friar Lawrence come in, his strongest utterance yet, played by the whole brass section. Doesn't matter. Swept aside by strife as he takes us through and through until we reach the coda. The moment in the story we knew was coming, but maybe didn't want to admit. Get these triplets in the timpani, leading us to certain doom. Funeral drums, falling love theme in the bassoon and cellos, and a very, very long note in the tuba. As love sinks lower and lower, we then hear the final appearance of Friar Lawrence. He seems to soar higher, this time played by the whole woodwind section with horns. And then love. Love starts to soar, and this time in the key of B minor. Do you remember earlier on we talked about the relevance, the meaning of keys? B minor was seen as the key of patience, of calm, awaiting one's fate, and of submission to divine dispensation. But it's so painfully bright. It's like looking at the reflection of sunlight from snow. It dazzles us in its extreme and then freezes a love that was never meant to be. And he could have finished it there. It could have faded away to nothing. You know, love parting two people together in death, but he didn't. He finishes with this series of insincere chords, such anger and fury at the futility of all that had happened. So now we're going to hear a complete performance of Tchaikovsky's Fantasy Overture, Romeo and Juliet, conducted by Gavin Maloney, performed by the RTÉ National Symphony Orchestra. Orchestra. Thank you very much.